What's up, everyone? Let's get started.
The RFK Revelation. The sun was setting over the Mediterranean as Lieutenant Meir Cohen sat at his desk inside the Israeli Ministry of Defense, the soft orange glow of the fading daylight seeping through the blinds. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, but his mind was miles away, focused not on the encrypted data before him, but on a letter that had recently crossed his path. A letter, it seemed, that held the power to reshape history and potentially to ignite a new war in the Middle East. Cohen had been with the Israeli Intelligence Corps for almost a decade, handling some of the most sensitive operations in the world. Yet this case was different. Unlike previous assignments, this one had an eerie weight to it. It involved a man, Sirhan Sirhan, whose name had become a symbol of American tragedy and political conspiracy. Sirhan had been convicted of assassinating Robert F. Kennedy in 1968, but Cohen had recently learned of a letter, hidden for years, that suggested Sirhan might not have acted alone. The implications were staggering. Was there a deeper conspiracy at play? And what role did the Middle East have in all of this? The first letter, discovered in 2007 by a retired FBI agent, had triggered a series of investigations that led to dead ends. Yet the letter Cohen had in his possession, which had come from a very reliable source within the CIA, was far more alarming. It mentioned a second letter, one that Sirhan had written just before his trial. This letter was said to contain details about his handlers, foreign connections, and the reason for his action. According to the source, the letter had never been found. But what if it was out there, waiting to be discovered? If it fell into the wrong hands, it could reopen old wounds, not just in the United States, but in the Middle East, where tensions were already running high. Cohen knew that if he didn't act quickly, the letter could set off a chain reaction. The thought of an emboldened radical group using this information to manipulate public sentiment and perhaps reignite violence was terrifying. But time was running out. His superiors had already tasked him with tracking down this second letter, no matter the cost. 3 days later, Cohen found himself boarding a plane to Washington, D.C. The mission was clear: retrieve the second letter and destroy it if possible. He had to make sure no one could use its contents to manipulate the fragile peace in the Middle East. But the closer he got to his destination, the more he began to feel the weight of history on his shoulders. He sat in the darkened plane cabin, reviewing the intelligence he'd gathered on Sirhan's connections. His mind raced over the details, searching for a thread that might lead him to the elusive letter. Cohen knew that Sirhan, although Palestinian, had spent some time in Jordan before immigrating to the United States. The letter Cohen had seen briefly mentioned a man named Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization, and a possible link between Sirhan's assassination of RFK and Palestinian nationalist movements. Cohen couldn't ignore the possibility that this letter, if it existed, could be a key to understanding not just Sirhan's actions, but the larger web of political intrigue that had embroiled the Middle East for decades. As the plane descended toward Washington National Airport, Cohen felt a strange sense of foreboding. He had worked many missions before, but this felt different. What if uncovering the truth about Sirhan's assassination would open Pandora's box? Could it unravel everything? Could it reignite the flames of conflict? He didn't have time to dwell on such questions. The mission was clear, and he had no choice but to follow it through. By the time Cohen arrived at his hotel, the night had fully settled over the city. The streets of Washington were quiet, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. He had arranged a meeting with an old contact, a former CIA operative who had connections to the agency's more secretive operations. His name was Michael Harris, and while they had worked together before, Cohen wasn't sure how much he could trust him. The stakes were too high, and Harris had always been a man of shadows, someone whose loyalties were often in question. The two men met in the dimly lit corner of a cafe, an old haunt where they had exchanged information in the past. Harris, a tall man with a weathered face and graying hair, leaned in as Cohen sat across from him. "I don't know why you're looking for this letter, Mayor," Harris said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I can tell you this. If it exists, it's not going to be easy to find. People have been looking for it for years." Cohen narrowed his eyes. "I need to know where it is." Harris hesitated, glancing around the room before speaking again. "You have to understand something. That letter, if it exists, is more than just a piece of paper. It's a symbol. It represents something much larger. There are people out there, powerful people, who would kill to get their hands on it. And they won't hesitate to do whatever it takes. Cohen's mind raced as Harris's words settled in. The implications were chilling. If this letter fell into the wrong hands, it could destabilize not just the Middle East, but the entire world order. The delicate peace negotiations that had been progressing in recent years could come to a screeching halt, leaving behind a region in chaos. And yet, Cohen couldn't afford to back down now. The mission was bigger than just him. "I'll do whatever it takes," Cohen said, his voice firm. Harris leaned back, his expression unreadable. "There's one person you need to see. A woman named Claire Roth. She's been tracking Sirhan's movements for years, and she has access to old intelligence files that might point you in the right direction. But be careful. She's not someone who trusts easily." Cohen nodded. "Where can I find her?" "Washington, D.C., Harris replied. "She's holed up in a small apartment near DuPont Circle. But don't expect her to give you anything easily. If she knows what you're after, she might try to manipulate you." Cohen stood up, the weight of the task ahead settling heavily on his shoulders. "I'll take my chances." The next day, Cohen made his way to the apartment near DuPont Circle. It was an unassuming building, with a facade that blended into the city's mix of old and new. He rang the bell and waited. After a few moments, the door opened slightly, revealing a woman with sharp blue eyes and a guarded expression. She looked at him for a moment before stepping aside to let him in. "I'm assuming you're the one Harris sent," she said, her voice calm but tinged with suspicion. Cohen nodded, stepping inside. The apartment was small but meticulously organized. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with files and intelligence reports. A desk sat against one wall, covered with more papers, all carefully arranged. But it was the woman herself who drew Cohen's attention. She was in her early 40s, with short dark hair and an air of quiet intensity. She exuded an aura of someone who had seen and experienced things few others could understand. "I need your help," Cohen said, getting straight to the point. "I'm looking for a letter. A second letter from Sirhan Sirhan. It contains information about his motives and potential foreign connections. It could be buried, or it could be in someone's possession right now. But I need to find it before it falls into the wrong hands." Claire's expression darkened at the mention of the letter. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just studying Cohen with an inscrutable gaze. "Why do you think this letter is so important?" she asked finally. Cohen hesitated. "Because if it exists, it could change everything. Not just about Sirhan's assassination of RFK, but about the entire geopolitical landscape. It could start a new conflict." Claire nodded slowly, as if contemplating the gravity of his words. "I've been tracking Sirhan's case for years," she said, her tone somber. "But I've never heard of this second letter. I think it's time we find out if it's real, before anyone else does." Cohen nodded, a sense of determination flooding his veins. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. And so, the hunt for the second Sirhan Sirhan letter began in earnest. The following days were a blur of covert meetings and late-night strategy sessions, as Cohen and Claire Roth pooled their resources and expertise to search for the second letter. They started by retracing Sirhan Sirhan's movements in the years leading up to the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. The trail was long, winding through a maze of connections, each more elusive than the last. But they were determined. The stakes had become too high for them to fail. One of the first leads Claire pursued was a file she had uncovered during her years in the CIA's counterterrorism division. It was a file that had been buried deep within the agency's vaults, marked sensitive, destroy after review. But Claire had a habit of keeping things that might prove valuable one day. She had always suspected there was more to Sirhan's story than the official narrative, and now, it seemed, she was on the verge of finding out just how deep the rabbit hole went. "Here it is," Claire said one afternoon, her voice low with intensity. "This is the document I've been looking for. It's a debriefing from a former KGB officer who defected in the late 70s. He claims that Sirhan had been in contact with Soviet intelligence operatives in the years leading up to the assassination." Cohen leaned in, reading over her shoulder. "So, he wasn't just working for a Palestinian group? This could change everything." "It could," Claire said, flipping through the pages. "But there's something more interesting in here. This officer claims that Sirhan wasn't the only one being manipulated. He believes that there was a bigger network behind him, one that involved not just the Soviets, but also Arab nationalist movements. and, more alarmingly, the Mossad. Cohen froze. He wasn't used to hearing his own intelligence agency's name in such a context. The Mossad had always been considered one of the world's most elite intelligence services, and for the Soviets or Arab groups to be collaborating with them seemed unthinkable. But Cohen had learned to trust the evidence, even when it contradicted everything he thought he knew. "Is there any mention of the letter?" Cohen asked, his voice steady but betraying a flicker of urgency. Claire paused, flipping through the file more quickly now. "Yes, here it is," she said, her finger pointing to a small section near the end. "It mentions that Sirhan was supposed to deliver a letter to someone in the U.S. government just before his trial. But the letter never surfaced. The defected KGB officer suggests that the letter could contain proof of a larger conspiracy, something that the U.S. government and the Mossad would want to keep hidden at all costs." Cohen rubbed his temples. This was getting more complicated by the minute. If this letter existed, it was more than just a political bombshell. It was a key that could unlock a much darker, hidden chapter of history. And if it fell into the wrong hands, it could destabilize everything. The next step was to dive into Sirhan's personal history. Claire had connections to various Middle Eastern informants who had provided valuable intelligence over the years, and Cohen knew that this was a critical lead. He was well aware of the ongoing tensions in the region, and the last thing he wanted was for the revelation of Sirhan's potential connections to spark another round of violence. "We need to focus on his time in Jordan," Cohen said one evening as they sat over a map of the Middle East. His stay there wasn't long, but it's clear that he came into contact with several key figures in Palestinian militant groups. "There's something we're missing, and I believe it's tied to Jordan." Claire nodded, tapping a finger against the table. "I'll reach out to my contacts in Amman. They may have more recent information on Sirhan's associates. If this letter exists, there's a chance it's linked to a network we haven't considered yet." For the next few days, Cohen and Claire worked tirelessly, tracking down old leads and trying to piece together Sirhan's life and possible connections to both Palestinian groups and foreign intelligence services. The more they learned, the more it became clear that Sirhan's assassination of RFK was not the work of a lone man. Someone had orchestrated it, pulling the strings from the shadows. But every step closer to the truth only brought them closer to danger. One night, Cohen received a call from Michael Harris, his old CIA contact. There was an urgency in the man's voice, something Cohen hadn't heard before. "Meir, you need to get to New York, now," Harris said, his words quick and clipped. "I've just learned that someone else is looking for the letter, and they're not the kind of people you want to get mixed up with." "Who?" Cohen asked, his heart rate quickening. "Who else knows about this?" "I don't have all the details, but I've tracked a shadow group connected to a private mercenary organization. They've been moving through DC, and I suspect they've been watching you. The letter is their priority, and they'll stop at nothing to get it." Cohen's mind raced. The mercenaries could mean only one thing. The stakes had escalated. These were not just political operatives anymore. They were dangerous men with nothing to lose. Whoever controlled the letter could control the narrative and possibly spark a new conflict. Cohen couldn't afford to let that happen. "I'll head to New York tomorrow," Cohen replied. "Thanks for the warning." Before he hung up, Harris's voice dropped lower, filled with grim advice. "Be careful, Meir. This isn't just about Sirhan or the letter anymore. It's about something bigger. There are forces at play here that you can't even begin to understand." The following day, Cohen and Claire boarded a flight to New York. As the plane soared through the sky, Cohen reflected on the journey that had led him to this point. His entire life had been about protecting his country, securing its future. But now, it seemed, he was caught in the middle of something far more dangerous. A conspiracy that spanned decades, with roots in the Cold War, the Middle East, and beyond. When they landed in New York, Cohen had one goal: find the letter and make sure it didn't fall into the hands of those who would use it to stoke violence and unrest. They headed to a safe house Claire had arranged, a place where they could regroup and plan their next move. But as they arrived, the unexpected happened. A black SUV screeched to a halt outside the building. Two men emerged, their faces hidden by dark sunglasses. Before Cohen could react, the front door to the safe house was kicked open and armed men stormed in. The men were mercenaries, no doubt hired by whoever was after the letter. Cohen dove for cover, grabbing Claire's arm and pulling her behind a sturdy table. The mercenaries fired into the room, but they were met with resistance. Cohen and Claire both pulled out their weapons, returning fire with precision, taking down two of the attackers before the others retreated. The gunfire echoed in the small room, and the adrenaline coursing through Cohen's veins kept him alert, focused. Once the dust settled, Cohen's heart raced as he took in the situation. The mercenaries had failed, but they were a sign of something much worse. Whoever wanted the letter was willing to go to extreme lengths to get it. "We need to move," Cohen said urgently. "They'll be back, and we can't afford to stay in one place for long." Claire nodded, her face grim. "I know someone who can help us, but we need to get out of here. Fast." As Cohen and Claire gathered their things and prepared to leave, Cohen couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The clock was ticking, and there was no telling who else might be looking for the second Sirhan Sirhan letter. If they couldn't find it first, the consequences could be catastrophic. They had no choice but to stay one step ahead of their enemies, because in this game, the truth was as dangerous as the lie it might expose. The safe house was no longer safe. Cohen and Claire had barely managed to slip away from the mercenaries when they received word that the attackers were part of a larger network, a shadowy group with deep pockets, connections across various intelligence agencies, and a far-reaching agenda. The two of them knew they couldn't outrun the storm that was coming, but they still had a mission. To find the second Sirhan Sirhan letter before it could do irreparable damage. By the time they reached their next destination, a former CIA safe house in the outskirts of Brooklyn, it was clear that their movements were being tracked. The hairs on the back of Cohen's neck stood on end. As they entered the building, Claire took a moment to glance around, scanning the surroundings with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years in the world of intelligence. "We need to stay low," Claire murmured. "Whoever's after this letter has resources. They'll be able to track us everywhere we go." Cohen nodded, already thinking ahead. His phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from Michael Harris. "I've just learned who's after you. It's a rogue faction within the CIA. They're working with a private network of mercenaries to get the letter, and they'll do whatever it takes to stop you." Cohen swore under his breath. The CIA. Of course. They had been involved in some of the most complex operations in the Middle East, often operating behind the scenes, using deniable assets. Now, this rogue faction had an interest in the letter, and that could only mean one thing. The letter was not just a political time bomb. It was a Pandora's box of secrets that had the potential to alter the course of history. "We need to find it first," Claire said firmly, breaking his chain of thought. She was already on the move, pulling out her laptop and connecting to a secured network. "I have some sources who can help us track down the letter's last known location." Cohen took a seat across from her, watching her work as she typed quickly. She was a blur of action, eyes scanning the screen while her fingers danced across the keyboard. He appreciated her calm under pressure, but even she couldn't hide the underlying tension. Every minute they delayed could mean the difference between success and failure. Minutes passed in silence, punctuated only by the clicking of keys. Finally, Claire looked up, her face illuminated by the glow of the laptop. "I think I found it," she said, her voice laced with cautious optimism. The letter is believed to be in the possession of a former CIA officer named Robert King. He was a liaison to various foreign governments in the Middle East during the late 60s and early 70s. King's known for his shadowy dealings, and he's been linked to several operations that didn't officially exist. Cohen stood up. "Where is he?" Claire scanned through the intel, her brow furrowing. "He's hiding out in Paris. He's been there for years, living under the radar. But I don't know how much longer we have. If the rogue faction is closing in, they'll likely be there too. Then we go to Paris," Cohen said decisively. The flight to Paris was a tense one. Neither Cohen nor Claire spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts as the plane cruised above the clouds. They were both aware that this mission could be their last. Every move they made felt like they were drawing closer to a confrontation they couldn't predict. The letter, the ultimate key to unraveling the political intrigue surrounding RFK's assassination, was slipping further from their grasp with every passing hour. As the plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, Cohen felt the weight of their task bearing down on him. The streets of Paris were bustling, vibrant, a stark contrast to the cold, tense atmosphere in their minds. They had no time to waste. Claire's contact in Paris, a former Mossad operative named Eli, had already set up a meeting at a cafe near the Latin Quarter. Eli was an old friend of Claire's, someone who knew the darker corners of the intelligence world and had access to a network of informants who could help them track King. Cohen had no illusions. This was going to be a dangerous mission, but it was their only shot. The cafe was tucked away on a quiet street, far from the tourist areas. As Cohen and Claire entered, they spotted Eli immediately, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, wearing a leather jacket and dark sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. He looked every bit the part of the experienced spy, his sharp gaze taking in everything around him. "Claire," Eli greeted her with a nod, his gravelly voice carrying a weight of authority. "Meir," he added, acknowledging Cohen with a brief handshake. "I heard about your little encounter in New York. You're lucky to be alive." Cohen didn't have time for pleasantries. "We need to find Robert King. Do you have a lead?" Eli motioned for them to sit down. "I've been following King's movements for a while now. He's been hiding in Paris under a new identity, but I know where he's been meeting with certain individuals. He's been seen frequently at a place called Le Moulin Rouge, a nightclub in the Montmartre district. The place has connections to the Russian mafia, and I suspect King has been selling off some of the intel he's been sitting on for decades." "Selling?" Claire asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "You mean he's been peddling state secrets?" Eli nodded grimly. "That's the word. King's got his hands on more than just the Sirhan letter. He's been leveraging information to the highest bidder, Soviets, the CIA, even private mercenary organizations. It's all about power and influence, and King's been playing the game for years." Cohen clenched his jaw. "We don't have time to waste. We need to get to him before anyone else does." Eli's eyes glinted with a sharp understanding. "I've arranged a meeting for tomorrow night at the club, but you need to be careful. If the people King is working with suspect you're looking for him, you'll be compromised in minutes." Cohen and Claire exchanged a look. There was no turning back now. They were walking into the lion's den, and they needed to be ready for whatever awaited them. The following night, they arrived at Le Moulin Rouge, a lavish and somewhat garish nightclub tucked away in the heart of Montmartre. The neon lights flickered outside, casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. The club itself was a dark, pulsating place, filled with people from all walks of life, tourists, locals, and people with agendas of their own. Claire and Cohen entered the club, blending into the crowd as best they could. They had disguised themselves as a couple, hoping that the distraction would buy them time. They moved cautiously, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of Robert King. But the place was crowded, the air thick with smoke and the sound of French music. Minutes passed, but neither Cohen nor Claire saw anyone who resembled the former CIA officer. As the night stretched on, they began to wonder if they were too late, if King had already vanished into the shadows. Then, just as they were about to leave, Cohen caught sight of a man in the back corner, sitting alone at a table, a glass of whiskey in his hand. It was him. "Robert King," Cohen murmured, his heart pounding. "That's him." Claire nodded. "We need to move fast. I'll cover you." Cohen gave her a quick nod before moving toward King's table. As he walked, his hand hovered over the pistol hidden beneath his jacket. This could go smoothly, or it could go horribly wrong. But they had no choice. They had to confront King, find the letter, and uncover the truth before it was too late. The lights in the nightclub dimmed, casting a soft glow over the intimate tables and the few shadows that lingered in the corners. Cohen's steps were measured and deliberate as he made his way toward the man sitting in the back. King didn't notice him approaching until Cohen was almost within arm's reach, the tension thick in the air, charged with the weight of what was at stake. King, a man in his late 60s with graying hair and a face that had long since lost its youthful features, looked up, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Cohen's presence. There was no sign of surprise, no flicker of fear, just a cold, calculating gaze, as if he'd been expecting this moment for years. He didn't even flinch when Cohen took a seat across from him. "You're a long way from home, Meir Cohen," King said, his voice low and gravelly, a slight sneer twisting his lips. "I wasn't sure anyone would come looking for me after all this time." Cohen didn't answer immediately. He was studying King, assessing the man with the same precision he would use when reading an enemy in the field. He knew this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. King was no stranger to manipulation or deceit. He had built an empire out of secrets, and secrets were exactly what Cohen was after. "I'm here for the letter," Cohen said bluntly, his eyes locked on King's. King leaned back in his chair, an amused chuckle escaping his lips. Ah, yes. The second letter. You think you're the first one to ask for it, huh? How quaint. Claire, standing at a distance near the bar, was keeping her eyes on the room while maintaining a careful watch on Cohen's interaction. She knew how dangerous it was to sit across from a man like King. He was too comfortable in these high-stakes games, and he could turn deadly in an instant. You don't get to have it, King continued, swirling his drink and savoring the moment. Not unless you understand what it really means. This letter, this secret, isn't just about the past. It's about shaping the future. Cohen's patience was wearing thin. Stop playing games, King. Where is it? King leaned forward, his voice taking on a more conspiratorial tone. You don't get it, do you? You've spent all this time chasing ghosts, Palestinian movements, Soviet intelligence, the CIA, Mossad. All of you have danced around the truth. And now, here you are, at the doorstep of a new war, and you still don't see the big picture. Cohen's hand clenched under the table. I'm not here for your rhetoric. I'm here for the letter. King's smile faded, his eyes turning steely. The letter is only a piece of the puzzle. The real question is, are you willing to do what needs to be done to control what's coming next? The people you're up against aren't just mercenaries or rogue agents. They're part of something much bigger. Cohen's mind raced. King was trying to manipulate him. He wasn't just hiding the letter. He was toying with the information Cohen needed, trying to use it to draw him into a game that was far beyond their reach. Claire's voice crackled through Cohen's earpiece, sharp and urgent. Meir, he's stalling. I've got eyes on the perimeter. We're not alone. Cohen's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to ask who else was lurking nearby. He knew the mercenaries were closing in. Time was running out. With a sharp exhale, Cohen refocused on King, his gaze unwavering. Enough with the theatrics, King. Where's the letter? For a moment, King just stared at him, sizing him up, before leaning back again, almost as if he were savoring the tension. Fine, King said, almost with a hint of regret. But you need to understand something first. If you take it, there's no turning back. You'll set off a chain of events that might unravel the entire region. And that's something no one can control, not even you. Cohen was already standing, his hand reaching for the small bag at his side. Where is it? King gave a small, resigned sigh. You're not going to like it. The old man motioned toward the back of the club, a dimly lit hallway leading behind the stage, where the sounds of music faded into the distance. Down there, King said, there's a storage room under the club. It's in a safe, encrypted. But be warned, the moment you touch that letter, you're signing a death warrant. Both your own, and everyone who's tied to it. Cohen glanced toward Claire, signaling her to stay alert, then moved toward the hallway King had indicated, his mind already working through possible contingencies. It felt too easy. King was too calm. He had been prepared for this moment, and Cohen was certain that the moment he laid hands on the letter, their situation would become infinitely worse. As Cohen reached the bottom of the stairs to the club's lower levels, the dim lighting cast long shadows along the concrete walls. The air was thick with a musty, underground smell, the distant hum of the club's music barely reaching his ears. The room at the far end looked like a storage unit, a few crates stacked against the walls, and a rusted safe sitting near the back. He approached the safe, scanning the area carefully. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled as he noticed a faint movement in the corner of the room. Someone was here, waiting. A shadowy figure moved closer, and Cohen's instincts flared. He reached for his gun, only to hear a voice, low and familiar. Don't even think about it. It was Claire. She had followed him down into the depths of the club. Her gun was trained on the figure who had emerged from the shadows, an older man, dressed in dark clothing, with a scar running down the side of his face. His eyes glinted coldly in the low light. Who are you? Cohen demanded, his heart racing as the figure stepped into full view. The man gave a thin smile, his gaze flicking between Cohen and Claire. I think the question is, who are you? Because I've been watching you for a while, and it's no coincidence you're here tonight. Who sent you? Claire pressed, keeping her gun steady, though Cohen could see her tension. The man chuckled darkly, a rasp in his voice. Let's just say I'm here to make sure the letter never leaves this place. And if you think you're going to walk out with it, you're sorely mistaken. The tension in the room escalated. Cohen's grip on his gun tightened, but something felt off. This wasn't just another mercenary. This man knew them, knew their every move. He was part of the network that had been hunting them, the one that wanted the letter as much as King did. You don't understand, the man continued, his eyes narrowing. The letter isn't just about power. It's about something much more dangerous. If you don't want to get caught in the crossfire, you'll leave it here. Walk away, and you might live to see another day. Cohen hesitated, his mind calculating the risks. But there was no time to deliberate. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. I'm not leaving without it. The man's expression darkened. Then you'll have to fight for it. Before Cohen could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway behind them. More men. The mercenaries. There was no escape now. The storm was about to break, and the only way out was through. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing ominously in the narrow, concrete hall. It wasn't just one or two men. They were coming in force, a small army, all converging on the storage room. Cohen's pulse quickened as he scanned the space around him, calculating their options. The walls were too close, the exit too far. And the man with the scar, he was only a part of the bigger puzzle, but it was clear he wasn't going to let them walk out of here easily. Get back, the man with the scar growled, his gun now raised, trained on Cohen. There's no need for this to get messy, but you're going to hand over the letter. Now, Cohen's heart raced, but his mind was still working at full speed. He could feel the pressure closing in, the stakes higher than ever. If they didn't make it out with the letter, the entire Middle East, and maybe the world, could be dragged into an explosive confrontation. The CIA, rogue elements, mercenaries, Russian operatives, all of them were after this one piece of paper. This letter held the key to RFK's assassination. But more than that, it was the linchpin in a geopolitical crisis waiting to unfold. But Cohen couldn't give it up. Not now. Not after everything they'd been through. Claire's voice broke the silence, sharp and steady. Meir, don't do it. We'll fight our way out. We've been through worse. Cohen's eyes flicked toward her, her gun still aimed at the scarred man. She was right. They had made it this far. They couldn't afford to back down now. What's your plan then? The scarred man sneered. There's a dozen men outside this door, and they're all here for one thing. The letter. You really think you can stop them all? Before Cohen could answer, the sound of another set of footsteps approached. These were lighter, more deliberate. The man with the scar turned his head briefly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. He stiffened, his grip tightening on the gun. A voice emerged from the shadows behind them, smooth and calm. Actually, I think they have a better chance than you think. The scarred man whirled around, his face twisting in surprise as the new figure stepped into the dim light. It was another man, dressed in black, with a face as cold and unreadable as stone. He was tall, lean, and unmistakably dangerous, his presence immediately commanding attention. Who the hell are you? The scarred man spat. The newcomer smiled, but it was a dangerous, almost predatory smile. Someone who's here to make sure you don't screw this up. He didn't make a move, but his gaze swept over the room with the precision of a hunter tracking its prey. He didn't need to raise his gun. His mere presence was enough to shift the balance. The mercenaries outside hesitated, unsure whether to advance. The air crackled with tension, as though everyone was waiting for a spark to ignite a deadly conflict. Cohen's instincts screamed at him. This was a game changer. Whoever this man was, he had power, and he had the upper hand. The mercenaries weren't eager to take him on, which meant he was someone they feared or respected. You're here for the letter, the scarred man said, his voice now laced with caution. What? You want to walk out with it like everyone else? The new arrival chuckled, a low sound full of menace. Not quite. I'm not here for the letter. I'm here for a much bigger prize. Cohen's mind raced. What was this man talking about? Who was he, really? Before anyone could respond, the door to the storage room suddenly burst open with a deafening crash, sending a gust of air into the room. More mercenaries flooded in. This time, at least half a dozen. They stormed into the cramped space, their weapons raised and their eyes trained on Cohen and Claire. Time's up, the scarred man growled. Cohen's heart pounded in his chest, but Claire was already a step ahead. She fired a single shot, her aim true, taking down the first mercenary who came too close. The others immediately scattered, ducking behind crates and whatever cover they could find. Chaos erupted in the cramped storage room. Move, Claire shouted, grabbing Cohen's arm and pulling him toward the far side of the room. Cohen didn't hesitate. He had one goal in mind, the safe. With Claire providing cover, he dashed toward the rusty metal safe in the corner. His mind worked rapidly, searching for the combination. But there was no time to try guessing the code. He pulled a small tool from his belt, quickly working on the safe's lock with practiced precision. The seconds felt like minutes. Behind him, gunshots rang out, the air thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Cohen barely registered the noise, his focus locked on the safe. He had to get the letter. The safe clicked open just as another wave of gunfire erupted, and Cohen barely managed to throw the heavy door wide. Inside, tucked neatly in a metal compartment, was a small envelope. The second Sirhan letter. His fingers closed around it. "Got it," Cohen said, his voice taut with tension, but his relief was short-lived. As soon as the letter was in his hand, he heard the sound of heavy boots advancing toward them. The scarred man was closing in, and with him, more mercenaries. They weren't going to let them escape without a fight. Suddenly, the stranger, the one who had appeared moments before, moved with lightning speed. He drew his gun and fired in quick succession. The first two mercenaries went down instantly, their bodies crumpling to the floor. "Go," the man shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This way." Cohen didn't hesitate. He grabbed Claire's arm and yanked her toward the back exit. The man with the scar shouted orders, but it was too late. The mercenaries were too disorganized, scrambling to regain control. The trio dashed through the narrow hallway, heading toward the service exit. Claire was ahead of Cohen, her eyes scanning the shadows for threats. Behind them, the muffled sounds of gunfire echoed through the club, but the further they ran, the more distant those sounds became. Finally, they reached the alley behind the club. The man with the scar wasn't following them, not yet, but they knew they didn't have much time. The man who had helped them escape was waiting in the alley, his car idling, engine running. He looked at them with an expression of cool indifference. "Get in," he ordered, and the door opened for them. Cohen and Claire didn't need to be told twice. They climbed into the car, and without a word, the man hit the gas, speeding down the narrow streets of Paris. As they drove, Cohen looked down at the envelope in his hand. The letter was finally his, but he knew this was only the beginning. Whoever this man was, whoever was pulling the strings, the stakes had just gotten higher. "Who are you?" Cohen asked, his voice low but demanding. The man glanced at him briefly, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I'm someone who's been keeping an eye on you, and I don't work for anyone else." "Who do you work for, then?" Claire asked sharply. The man remained silent for a moment before answering, his tone cryptic. "Let's just say that the people who sent you after that letter, they don't know everything." "Not yet." Cohen exchanged a glance with Claire. They were in deep now, deeper than they ever imagined. And whatever happened next, they had no choice but to ride this out. "Buckle up," the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Things are about to get a lot more complicated." And as they sped through the streets of Paris, Cohen realized just how right he was. The city of Paris, a place of romance and history, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. The car sped through the streets, weaving between traffic with sharp precision. Cohen couldn't stop glancing down at the envelope, still clutched tightly in his hand. Its weight was symbolic, a dangerous truth, hidden for decades, now in his possession. But with the letter came a whole new set of problems. The mercenaries, King, the scarred man, they weren't going to stop hunting them. And then there was the unknown figure in the back seat, the man who had come out of nowhere to save them. His face remained impassive, his eyes locked on the road, as if nothing were amiss. But Cohen could feel the tension in the air, the palpable silence between them. "Where are we headed?" Cohen finally asked, breaking the silence that had stretched too long. The man in the front seat didn't flinch, his hands steady on the wheel. "Somewhere safe. For now." Cohen raised an eyebrow. "Safe?" He glanced out the window. They were driving toward the outskirts of the city, past the familiar streets into darker, less populated areas. "I thought Paris was a safe place. How is this any different?" The man smiled thinly, but there was no warmth in it. "Nothing's safe anymore, not for people like us." "People like us?" Claire asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. The man's eyes flicked briefly to her in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "You're in this now. You've crossed a line. And the people who want that letter are already making their move." Cohen's mind raced. "Who are they? The people after the letter? You can't just tell us to trust you and then say things like that. Who are you?" The man's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenching slightly. You'll find out soon enough. But if you want to survive this, you need to understand something. This is bigger than any of us. There are forces at play that go beyond simple politics or intelligence. What's in that letter? It's not just about history. It's about the future. Cohen's brow furrowed. What do you mean, the future? The man didn't answer right away, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror again. When the truth about Robert Kennedy's assassination comes out, the Middle East is only the beginning. The fallout will be global. But what's worse is that it won't be the kind of war that ends with conventional arms. It's ideological. It's the kind of war where every side thinks they're the righteous one, and everyone will fight to control the narrative. Wait, Claire interjected, her voice growing more agitated. You're saying this letter, about RFK's assassination, is the catalyst for some massive global conflict? And you think that we can just, what? Run away from it? The man's eyes darkened. No, you can't run from it. But you have a choice. You can help steer it in a direction that doesn't lead to complete disaster, or you can let it all go up in flames. It's up to you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Cohen felt the weight of them, but there was something about the man's tone that didn't sit right. He wasn't offering them a solution, he was offering them a choice. A terrifying, unmanageable choice. The car came to a sudden halt. Cohen looked up, realizing they had arrived at a nondescript warehouse. The door opened slowly, and the man pulled the car inside, parking in the shadowy recesses of the building. Welcome to our base of operations, the man said, his voice cool. Get out. Claire was the first to open the door. She stepped out, scanning the surroundings, her instincts still sharp. Cohen followed, eyeing the building warily. This place was secluded, too secluded. If this was a trap, they'd walked right into it. Inside, the warehouse was quiet, save for the faint hum of electrical equipment. The man led them toward a back office, a small, windowless room with a few monitors and a desk piled with papers. On the walls, there were maps of the Middle East, photos of key political figures, and a scattering of news clippings about the RFK assassination. It looked like a war room, a place for planning, for strategizing. The man dropped a set of keys on the desk and turned to face them. Sit. We need to talk. Cohen and Claire took the only available chairs, their eyes never leaving the man. He hadn't introduced himself, hadn't shared his real name, and Cohen was getting impatient. Who the hell are you? Cohen demanded again. The man paused for a moment, considering the question. You can call me Nash. Nash? Claire scoffed. Sounds like a fake name. Do you always introduce yourself like you're in a spy movie? The man's eyes sharpened, a flicker of something dark behind them. You're in a spy movie now, Claire. Whether you like it or not. Cohen leaned forward. Okay, Nash. I'm done with the games. Who are you working for? And what's the real story behind the letter? Nash sighed, clearly growing tired of the questions. Let's just say I'm working for someone who's been tracking this letter for a long time. And as for the story, that's a bit more complicated. He walked over to the desk, flipping open a folder. The papers inside were all confidential, stamped with various intelligence agencies' logos from across the globe. This letter isn't just a document about Sirhan Sirhan or the assassination. It's about what happened behind the scenes, the alliances that were forged in secret, the people who gained from RFK's death. Cohen's mind reeled. What do you mean? Nash picked up a file from the desk and handed it to Cohen. Read this. It will explain everything. You need to understand that the assassination was just the beginning of something much larger. Cohen opened the file, his eyes scanning the first few pages. The documents were thick with jargon, but there were key names and dates that immediately jumped out at him. Intelligence agencies, shadow operations, covert missions that had been going on for decades. This, Cohen trailed off. This is more than just a political assassination. This is about an entire network, a conspiracy that spanned years. Exactly, Nash said, his voice steady, almost resigned. The assassination was orchestrated by far more than just a lone gunman. It was a coordinated operation, a cover-up. And that letter, the one you've got, it's the final piece. It holds the names of those who were involved, the ones who are still pulling the strings. Claire took a deep breath. So we're not just fighting mercenaries and rogue agents. We're talking about a full-on global conspiracy. Precisely, Nash replied. And it's not just the past that's at risk. It's the future. The people who want that letter are the ones who believe they can reshape history for their own ends. If they get their hands on it, it'll reignite a conflict that could make the Cold War look like a skirmish. Cohen sat back, trying to process the enormity of what Nash had just revealed. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. And now, they weren't just playing for survival, they were playing for the future. But why us? Claire asked. Why did you come to us? Nash's gaze flickered for a moment, as though weighing how much to reveal. Because, whether you realize it or not, you've been part of this for a long time. Both of you. Your lives, your work, it's all been a small part of the larger picture. Now, you have the chance to make a difference, or to let everything fall apart. Cohen's mind was spinning. So what's our next move? Nash leaned forward, his voice hard. We need to get to the people behind the mercenaries. They've already made their move. The question is, can we stay one step ahead? But Cohen's thoughts were already racing ahead of him. Nash was right about one thing. They had crossed a line. There was no going back. The world was about to change, and they were at the center of it. Then let's finish this, Cohen said, his resolve hardening. Nash nodded, a small but knowing smile tugging at the corners of his lips. That's the spirit. And with that, the game had officially begun. The atmosphere in the warehouse thickened as Nash led Cohen and Claire into the depths of the building, past rows of metal storage containers that seemed to stretch endlessly into the gloom. The dim, flickering lights overhead cast long shadows, heightening the sense that something sinister was lurking just beyond the reach of the light. Nash's movements were precise, deliberate, like someone used to the shadows, accustomed to staying a step ahead of danger. He didn't seem to need to explain his actions to Cohen and Claire. The tension between them had become palpable. They had been thrust into a game they didn't fully understand, with stakes higher than they could have ever imagined. But Nash wasn't offering them much in the way of answers, and that only raised more questions. Where are we going? Claire asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Her eyes flicked nervously to the dimly lit hallway as they walked. Nash didn't glance back, but his voice echoed in the silence. We're going to meet the people who can help you understand what's at stake. You can't handle this alone. Cohen could hear the underlying urgency in his words, the weight of unspoken knowledge. He had thought that after securing the letter, the hardest part would be over. But now, it seemed like the real fight was just beginning. Are we getting closer to the answers? Cohen asked. He had to know. His mind was burning with questions, the need to understand driving him forward. You're getting closer to understanding what the letter represents, Nash replied cryptically. The assassination of Robert Kennedy was just the beginning of something far larger. The truth behind that event has been buried, manipulated, and controlled for decades. What's in the letter is the key to unlocking it. Cohen's stomach churned. The weight of the situation was heavier than ever. The letter held not just the truth about RFK's assassination, but something far more dangerous. Something that, if revealed, could destabilize an already fragile global order. We have the letter, Claire said, her voice tinged with frustration. What now? We hand it over to whoever's pulling the strings? We can't trust anyone at this point, Nash. We don't even know who you're working for. Nash turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. You're right. Trust is a luxury you can't afford. But you're going to have to trust me on this. Your lives, and the lives of countless others, depend on it. Cohen's mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time, that every minute they spent in the dark would bring them closer to a tipping point they couldn't control. He glanced at Claire, whose expression mirrored his own unease. Why not just destroy the letter? Cohen asked. Why all this? Why risk everything for a piece of paper? Nash paused, his steps faltering for a brief moment before he turned back to face them. Destroying it won't change anything. It's already out there. People have already seen it, and the implications are too far-reaching to simply sweep under the rug. The truth about RFK's death, it's part of a larger narrative. A narrative that's been written by powerful people who want to control the future. If the letter gets into the wrong hands, it won't just be the Middle East that feels the consequences. It'll be the entire world. The words hit Cohen like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a political crisis, it was a global one. The letter, its contents, and the secrets it contained could be the match that lit the fuse of a fire that would burn through continents, rewriting the world order. We need to find out who's behind this, Nash, Cohen said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Who's really pulling the strings? And what are they going to do with this information? Nash didn't respond immediately. Instead, he led them into a small room at the back of the warehouse, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal exterior of the rest of the building. It was well lit, organized, and filled with screens displaying a flood of intelligence data. On the table in the center of the room, several files were spread out, some classified, others unmarked, as if they had been prepared just for this moment. "Sit," Nash instructed, gesturing to the chairs surrounding the table. As they did, he moved to one of the screens and tapped a few keys, bringing up a set of images. The first image flickered to life, a grainy photo of an old, faded man, with a face Cohen recognized all too well. It was a familiar image, one from the pages of history, the iconic photograph of Robert F. Kennedy's assassination, with Sirhan Sirhan standing just feet away. But the photo on the screen was zoomed in, and a second figure appeared, someone standing in the background, half hidden in the crowd, his face obscured. "That's who we're after," Nash said, his voice laced with cold conviction. "The person behind Sirhan Sirhan, the real mastermind." Cohen leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Who is he?" Nash paused, a grim look on his face. "His name is Ziv Vardi. He's Israeli, and he's been operating in the shadows for decades." Claire's face twisted in disbelief. "Israeli? You're telling me the real mastermind behind RFK's assassination is Israeli?" "It's not as simple as that," Nash said, his voice darkening. "Vardi is part of a much larger network, a clandestine faction within Israel's intelligence community. They've been working behind the scenes to manipulate events in the Middle East and beyond. And they've used RFK's assassination as a catalyst for their agenda. The letter you have, it contains a key piece of evidence linking Vardi to a much larger conspiracy." The name struck Cohen like a blow. Ziv Vardi. He had heard rumors of rogue elements within Israeli intelligence, but he had never thought it would lead back to something as monumental as RFK's death. This was no longer just about politics. This was about a global manipulation that stretched across decades, everything from the CIA's covert operations to the secret dealings between nations. "Why hasn't anyone exposed this before?" Claire asked, her voice low. "Why hasn't this come to light?" "Because Vardi and his network control the narrative," Nash replied, his expression dark. "They've covered their tracks for years. They've made sure that any attempt to expose the truth is suppressed, using whatever means necessary: political influence, intelligence operations, even assassinations. The letter you have, it's the proof they've been trying to erase. And if it falls into the wrong hands..." Cohen finished the thought for him. "It could ignite a war." Nash nodded grimly. "Exactly. And that's why we can't let anyone else get their hands on it." Cohen stared at the screen, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. They were standing at the crossroads of history, and every decision they made from here on out would ripple out in ways they couldn't predict. The stakes weren't just political anymore. They were existential. "We need to find Vardi," Cohen said, his voice filled with resolve. Nash didn't hesitate. "We will, but it's not going to be easy. Vardi isn't some rogue agent. He's a key player in a much larger game. And there are forces in play that you're not ready for. Forces that will stop at nothing to get that letter." The room fell silent. Cohen and Claire exchanged a glance, the enormity of what lay ahead settling in. They had crossed the line. There was no turning back now. Nash turned to face them, his eyes filled with grim determination. "Prepare yourselves. This is just the beginning. And if we fail, the consequences will be catastrophic." For the first time since they'd started this journey, Cohen felt the full weight of the task before them. The world was on the edge of something much darker than they could have ever imagined. And they were the ones who would decide whether it fell into chaos, or whether they could stop it. The game had changed, and now it was time to play.